Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build. Ryan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Really excited to dive into your story. But before we kick off, where are you calling in from? Where's home base?
Detroit, Michigan, Motown for the last 20 years now.
Yeah, awesome. I know you have a lot of deep ties with the city and with Michigan, generally speaking. So I'm excited for you to talk about that. Before we kick off, I'll start with your formal introduction. Sergeant Ryan Friedrichs is an Army 173rd Airborne Brigade combat veteran, where he served as an infantry team leader and squad leader. Ryan deployed to Afghanistan in 2012 and to Poland in 2014 as the first U.S. response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. Today, Ryan is a vice president of development at Related Properties, working with its founder, Stephen Ross, to create a new University of Michigan Technology Innovation campus and surrounding developments in Detroit. Ryan previously served as chief development officer for the city of Detroit, where he helped generate $1.1 billion in direct investments into its initiatives. Ryan is an honors graduate of the University of Michigan and Harvard University's JFK School of Government, where his master's studies focus on civic engagement and urban planning. Most importantly, Ryan is a husband and father. Ryan and his wife, Jocelyn Benson, Michigan's Secretary of State, live in Detroit with their 8-year-old son, Aiden. It is an awesome resume, man. I'm very, very excited to see how you got to where you're at today. And as I just called out there, all of your deep ties with Michigan in general. Excited to hear about that. So as you know, we like to kick off with your childhood in chronological order. So talk to us about where you grew up and what in childhood led you to your service.
Born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, right outside of it, a place called Scioto Township. My mother's from Marquette, Michigan, which is in the Upper Peninsula, so way up on Lake Superior. She was born up there. Our family goes back a couple of generations there. She grew up downstate, but I would go up there every summer. So I kind of think of myself as a outdoors kid first and foremost. Loved hiking. Got into the summer camps on Isle Royal is our big national park, which is their only national park in Michigan. It's in the middle of Lake Superior. Did a big hiking trips there, and the Porcupine Mountains in Michigan, and that's kind of the main formative time I think of my childhood in Michigan was the outdoors and growing up. Families, my dad, first memories of my dad are driving a tow truck. He was kind of starting a auto shop and has always worked with his hands. He was a builder, which we'll get into some of what we'll talk about in terms of building. He has a company called Homeland Solar now, which he's still up on roofs in his late 70s here, putting solar panels on roofs, even though, I worry about him. But so I always had a kind of working family. Outdoors was a big part of, like I said, my formative years. I went to Pioneer High School, which is directly a public school right across from the University of Michigan's football stadium. So it's hard to be there and not dream of going maize and blue and going to, Michigan for undergraduate, which is what I ended up doing. So that's kind of the start of the journey.
Yeah, that's awesome. My younger brother went to University of Michigan, and I went for a game at that stadium, and wow, it is an amazing experience.
Yeah, 111,000 people. Just the humanity of it is pretty wonderful to be around.
Yeah.
Win, lose, or draw, it's a heck of an experience. Although they've been doing some winning lately, which has been fun.
Yeah, it totally is. So what about childhood? Was it your peers? Was it relatives that kind of started the motions, right? The thought process of enlisting.
Well, I have kind of a non-traditional path to the military. I went in after graduate school, actually. So, September 11th anniversary, and it was the 23rd anniversary of it was this week. 9/11 was my second day at Harvard. So I'd worked my tail off at the University of Michigan. I got into Harvard. The dream was, to move back to Detroit and do the revitalization work. And my second day there was 9/11. I had a good friend named Todd Wida, wonderful kid, who I'd been in that Michigan football stadium with. He sat with us for years. He was a roommate of a couple guys from high school who also went to University of Michigan with me. Todd was at Kenner Fitzgerald, was killed 9/11. And his story is a powerful one. I'll take a minute to share some of it because I love to lift his
Please.
name up. The other guys I served with, he was a kid who had panic attacks when he was a kid from New Jersey. So bad he actually missed 3 years of school. He overcomes those, becomes like a camp counselor for kids with panic attacks. You meet him at U of M. He's like the life of the party. The guy is an amazing person. And yeah, his dad was a trader at Cantor Fitzgerald too. Ended up, I believe it was taking the ferry that morning. Todd took the train. So he was just there when the planes hit. He actually made a call to his mother to reassure her. Here's a kid who couldn't go to school, right, for 3 years. That nervous and anxious, keeping it together to reassure his mom on 9/11. So amazing story. We had a family friend, Josh Rosenthal, also, who was lost in the towers. And his grandmother, had hosted the 80th surprise birthday party for my grandmother. Our families were close. So really heavy day. And I think that changed my grad school kind of trajectory. And I think I made a commitment, to come back to Detroit. I wanted to see that through after I graduated. But that's really where the military path starts for me is I, come home working in Detroit, and I'm volunteering with veterans organizations. And I think in my heart really want to contribute, really see record, PTSD starting as the deployments went on and on. Things like half of 1% of the population's active duty. The burden's not spread very wide. And I think it was too much on too small a group that was really getting to me. Record suicide rates, record divorce rates. You could see the toll. And I felt like I was volunteering with veterans groups doing something, but I ended up it was about 2010. I had a 5-year contract that was going to expire. And at the end of 2010, I started working with Mike Irwin, now Lieutenant Colonel, wonderful guy. Started an organization called Team Red, White, and Blue. And he was having trouble, he said, recruiting for a 54-mile ultramarathon, which was going to be in the memory of a wonderful pararescue jumper, one of the Air Force special operators, a guy named Joel Gentz, who had been killed in Afghanistan. And he'd Boston Marathon guy. I'd always wanted to run an ultra. And so the family had said, well, could you do an ultra in his memory? And Mike's like, I'm having trouble recruiting. I said, no kidding. 54 miles. And my God. But he knows I kind of love crazy stuff like that. So he had talked to me about doing it. And I ended up saying yes. And so we started, in Pontiac, Michigan, which is, 28 miles from Detroit, at midnight or something at the VA up there. And the family was there. And a group of us started running. I was one of the few civilians that I remember doing it, but Joel's brother was there, a couple friends too. But these guys were like, West Point Ranger types, like some Green Beret guy there. So I was really dying keeping up with them, but I did. And we get to Detroit, do the first 28 miles and have breakfast. And then we're going to run the Detroit Marathon. That's the last part of it. And it was really powerful. The family was driving, a support car, and you'd have some firefighters putting flags up along the way. It was really something. And the father, Steve Gentz, who's become a really good friend, and his wife, Judy, Steve stands up at the breakfast and kind of says, I want to run the first half of the Detroit Marathon with you guys. This was an inspiring night, but I got a sore hip or something. Does anybody want to go really slow with me? I was like, Steve, I'm your guy. I'm your man. So I ended up running this first half of this half marathon with Steve. And that's sort of one of those inflection points in life, right? Life's forever different after that for me. Just sharing stories about his son. I'm a dad now. You never really understand, the depth of that until you're a parent, what the loss of a son is or a child is. So that was powerful. And Steve just, sharing stories. You cross the Ambassador Bridge into Canada, kind of as the sun is coming up. It's really something. It's an international marathon. And then Steve peels off 13 miles in. So I got the last 13 miles. The other group is way gone, right? And just to sort of think about things. And I think it was, looking back, I think that's probably where the maybe, should I goes to a yes, right? I'm older at that point, late 20s, maybe almost 30 at that point, but it's like, I'm healthy, I'm fit, I can do stuff like this. I got a window until I start my next thing. I'm usually about a 5-year guy in my projects. You mentioned Chief Development Officer of the city, it's 5 years, right? This is my standard. So I'm thinking, why not put on the uniform, put in a 5-year chunk here. Active duty contracts are about 4 years active, 4 years reserve. And so have a very supportive spouse who's gonna, we're married at this point. Is she gonna put up with this? And she got it, man. She really understood. She had done some investigating of hate groups, in the Deep South when she graduated, 19 years old from college. So front lines kind of work in civil rights, and so she got this idea of putting your body, putting yourself on the line, and kind of some of the meaning and purpose that can come from that, which I
Mm-hmm.
think some of my dad's family and others didn't quite understand, and some of my work colleagues and people are just like, "What are you doing?" And it was a non-traditional turn to go in, and
Mm-hmm.
especially to go in infantry and to go in enlisted, not officer, which I think a lot of them were expecting. And that just felt like, to me, if you're going to go in and do one or two tours, I wanted to make them an infantry tour, try and be on the front line, try and actually share that burden, the way I love, everybody serves their own way. I'm not knocking anybody else. That was just my feeling for how I could contribute, given what I felt was the need and who was carrying the burden over there. So there he was. Yeah, the January of that year, 2011, it was, took the oath. It was a surge in Afghanistan at the time, so I felt like that was the fight I was excited to be a part of, and they needed people. And yeah, I thought I'd be in the 82nd Airborne, which is kind of the mothership of the infantry airborne in the U.S. Army. And because I volunteered to jump out of the planes, which is again another thing that, my wife and I jumped out of a plane there after we got married. So I figured that's something I can do. I could help out. And they said, no, you're going overseas for 3.5 years. You're going to go to the 173rd Airborne, stationed out of Vicenza, Italy, which was, as a married couple, that was a bit of a shock because she was teaching law, and it was going to be, it's a hell of a unit. It was extraordinary to be assigned to serve with them. But that's the thing. You go where you're asked to serve. You sign up and you go. So yeah, that was the beginning story. It wasn't really sort of from childhood or even
Mm-hmm.
looking at it as a career. It was more a reaction to 9/11, to feeling like, just working with the veterans organizations those early years in Detroit was a way to help, but it wasn't kind of enough. I kind of needed to put on the uniform to, feel like I was living a complete life. It's just in my own path.
Sure. Yeah, that's an awesome story in terms of how you got there, in terms of how you decided to enlist. I want to take a few steps back here.
Yeah.
If I understood the timeline of that ultra correctly, you basically preemptively started the Detroit Marathon by adding or just like doubling it, right? You
Yeah,
ran
we ran
prior.
28 miles
Okay,
that at
yeah.
midnight. We started at midnight, do 28 miles to Detroit because the Woodward, you run
Hmm.
right down Woodward 28 miles. You end up in Detroit. We had a little food, in the morning, a little breather, and then you actually run the Detroit Marathon, which is
Then
another
into it.
26 miles on top of it. So yeah, that was big. That's a lot of running. I've done,
Yeah.
marathons, and in the military we did some ultra type stuff, but that was a big one for me. That was huge.
Sure. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really cool. I never, I've heard of ultras, I've heard of all these different types, but I never heard of, starting before like an actual marathon and then just segueing into it. That's a great idea. I mean, it also, I think
Yeah.
it helps in terms of energy and like shift in dynamic. That's really cool.
Yeah,
And
and the second half being with a big group because
right.
that's when you're hurting the most, and sometimes those are, you get really stretched out in ultra. So that being with the marathon, the race course, the support of water and Gatorade, and a big finish you're right. It was a nice way to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. At what point did you get married in this timeline?
2006. So we
Hmm.
came. I met my wife at Harvard. She was at the law school. I was at the graduate school. She was coming to Detroit to clerk for kind of a civil rights icon here, a judge named Damon Keith, who is a Thurgood Marshall protege, one of the first black federal appellate judges, U.S. history. Remarkable guy. He actually officiated our wedding just passed a few years ago. Really, really missed the guy. Wonderful, wonderful person. And so yeah, this Detroit path is somebody I met who's like got Detroit, and she's a remarkable woman herself. And yeah, we moved here. I want to say late '04 was probably when we came here. So it's been about exactly 20 years.
Amazing, amazing. Congrats.
Mm.
That's a big accomplishment.
Yeah, the leap here to Detroit and building a life here. We've been in the neighborhoods about 10 years. We lived downtown for the first 10, where she was kind of walking to the courthouse. So with the sort of military years, tucked in there, we've been here,
Mhm.
yeah, basically 2 decades now. Been seeing a lot in the city. It's been great to be a part of it.
Awesome. All right. So moving forward into like your literal enlistment, and then
Yeah.
training to get into your unit. Talk to us a little bit about, in particular, given when you enlisted, right? Just in terms of age, as you noted, a non-traditional route. I mean, what was that like for you? How did that work out?
Basic training was at Sand Hill, or which it was called Fort Benning at that point. They've changed the name, but basic training is tough. That's legit basic training. That's like old school basic training with the infantry at Sand Hill, Fort Benning. Um, Actually ended up meeting a very good guy there, a guy named Shane Cantu, one of three people. Lindsay Cody was the other guy who was in my basic training group, infantry school training group, and then went to jump school with me, and then was assigned to the 173rd Airborne. So three of us went all the way through. And actually on September 11th, 2011 was the day we flew from Detroit after all that train up and a little break at home. Then you go, your unit actually flew that day to Vicenza, Italy, and then showed up to the 173rd together. Shane
Yeah,
and I did, yeah.
yeah, awesome. And was there anyone with you, whether it was in basic training or once you got through your unit, like at a similar stage in life, or even just purely age?
Yeah, in basic training, there was National Guard guys who would be
Hmm.
roughly that age. So there was a couple, but again, the majority of that are much younger guys who were in
Right.
their, just even out of high school. A lot of them older than high school, but early 20s. So definitely was
Right.
the big brother and older. But I was fit. I'd done martial arts for a good 15, 20 years. I could scrap the rolling, the kind of MMA stuff they teach you there, which the guys really love. So I had a good experience there. They put you as a squad leader because you're older, that kind of stuff, or the kind of simulated squad leader roles.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's tough, and it's anybody's been through it. They're trying to simulate deployment,
Hmm.
reduce stress, let the group bond through adversity, stick up for the weak links, right? Separate you from family. They hold back your letters. They do all this stuff to mess with the drill sergeants are kind of this threat, right? That you guys have to rally against. So I can see a lot of those dynamics and learn. Also, the organizational side of me really appreciated learning it. It's an extraordinary structure. A lot of people talk about you really want to know, how a great Fortune 500 company works. Go work the front lines at one of them. Work at a Starbucks
Yeah.
or McDonald's and see how an incredible operation works. That's being in the front lines of the military, the U.S. military, one of the most competitive organizations in the world too, where everything is competitive and everything is also team, and the way they do values. And sometimes they live up, sometimes they don't, like any culture. But um, that was fascinating too. So you meet great friends there. And being older was a benefit mainly. I didn't tell them how
Hmm.
old I was, as long as you can keep up, and I was in really good shape. So that's kind of all that matters. If you can hold your own, if they want to, do the grappling and stuff, or if you want to do the fitness stuff, as long as you do that, that's all right. And the rest of it's just sort of survival. So everybody's just trying to hunker down and get through. And like I said, there were some National Guard guys who maybe were a little bit older or my same age, so that helped, normalize it a bit too.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Glad to hear that it was a good experience overall, and that you could even perceive it as a positive in ways. That's awesome to hear. Cool. So you arrive
Yeah.
in Italy. You meet up with your unit. What was that like in terms of like, integrating with the new team?
Oh man, 173rd is an incredible unit. It's a very high op tempo. If you've never seen it, there's a documentary called Restrepo that Sebastian Younger wrote, or filmed, I should say, with Tim Hetherington. And that was a deployment before, one or two before mine, in
Hmm.
Afghanistan, that the 173rd had done. Sal Gunta was the first living Medal of Honor winner since the Vietnam War. He was in 173rd in that unit, and he was awarded it for that deployment, which was really, really heavy and tough. That was in the Corongo Valley, one of the hardest combat in the entire war. So we're showing up there. Sean Horval, one of the guys who actually Saul Gunta took with him to the White House to get that Medal of Honor. He
Hmm.
was my first sergeant. I mean,
Awesome.
he's rolls up, two sleeves full of tattoos. Here we go. I was like, do we get 2 weeks to get? He's like, we're going to Germany like tomorrow. Like none of that stuff like matters. Like it was just like everything they sort of say about what it's going to be and basic. It's just all gone. It's just, here we go. We're leaving tomorrow in Germany. I don't care about unpacking or where you're gonna. It was just, yeah. Just, you're getting on a roller coaster. You're not going to be off it
Hmm.
for years. And I loved Sean Harville. He's an amazing leader. And so, yeah, my first memories, we just went right up to Grafenir, Germany, which is like real gnarly part of Germany where you just do training and you're in the cold and the rain and the dark. And so we dove right in, and that op tempo was pretty high. And they were getting ready. I think they knew we were going to deploy, in the following year at least, which we ended up doing to Afghanistan. But that
Right.
was that,
Yeah.
diving right in off the high dive.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, nonetheless, it sounds like that's a pretty good, um, I don't know, timing to fit in like the rotation, right? You went straight to training, which I'm perceiving as a positive,
Yeah.
to then effectively be a workup to a deployment.
Yeah, and the way they were trying to use me as an asset is standing up these what are called COIST teams, which are like a company intelligence team, basically. So you could be an
Mm-hmm.
infantry leader, also put an intel team together, which is really valuable because we ended up being on an outpost, not necessarily on a big fight. We were maybe in the winter when the fighting season was over, but in the fighting season, we were actually on an outpost. And so to have your own intelligence assets that you're coordinating and being part of our work was actually very interesting. With my
Mm-hmm.
team that I was helping lead learn Dari, right? A basic Dari, which ended up being very valuable language skills. So that unit is a great unit. A lot of older guys, a lot of families were there as well. And so, yeah, I think the world of the 173rd. The op tempo is extreme, and they send them in tough deployments, like you'll see if you watch Restrepo. Um, but love the guys there. Absolutely, some great friends. We just saw one of them recently. Love those guys, and yeah, that took about a year, I think, roughly. Of less than a year, even if we came in the fall. So we
Mm-hmm.
want to say we left in the spring, in July of 20 that next year, 2012, to deploy to Afghanistan.
Yeah, awesome. So before we get to the deployment, what
Yeah.
was like, I don't know, just a high level from your memory, what was different really between uh, training before getting to your unit and that block of time once you did meet up with your unit training before deployment?
Everything's different, a night and day. I mean, basic training is one thing, but being in your unit is
Mm-hmm.
another world, right? Every unit's different. The 173rd, like I said, and paratroopers, I think in general, are really fitness heavy, and so you practice parachuting up in the mountain areas. What a lot of units will do, we did a lot of this after deployment, but what a lot of
Mm-hmm.
units will do, like a modern infantry parachute unit, one of their uses in combat, it's not necessarily the World War II, drop behind enemy lines use of a parachute unit. You use them actually to seize airports. That's kind of a
Mm-hmm.
tactical use, which you'll train up. And so one of the things, we can talk about it later, but when we were doing this up in Poland in response to the Russian invasion of Crimea, was training troops to seize airports, and you practice some of that work. So that's high intensity parachuting where you're some poor guy's hitting the water probably if you're going onto an airport, or some guy's hitting the fence, or somebody's hitting a light or a plane wing. I mean, airports are not soft fields to land on. And so, training up on how to do that, what's a safety, if you're going to hit the water, you can drown, you die easily in a parachute. It'll tangle you up and you'll drown. So you got to cut away from your chute as you're hitting the water. So when I think of train ups, we had really good, like a former RI, a ranger instructor who runs ranger school, was my platoon sergeant later on. I was trained as a breacher to breach doors with explosives. You can get through a bank vault door with a saline water bag, right? If you do it right. I mean, just really tactically trained at a very high level, really intense. And yeah, just guys who had come back from a tough deployment, right? Getting to know them, right? I'm new at that point. I'm older, but I'm not older in the military sense of it. So before deployment, I'm not a combat vet. I was, a specialist at that point. I wasn't a sergeant or a non-commissioned officer. So just a lot of learning. Keep it real humble. Keep it real respectful. Ask a lot of questions, and know when to shut up. But look out for the guys who are younger too, or guys who are struggling. I mean, that's kind of what it's all about. It's an incredible level of connection. Like I could tell you all the guys. I could tell you how long they could hold their breath underwater. I could tell you how long their blood types were. I could tell you they're afraid of. I could tell you, you know them 100 times better than usually, I should say, employees you work with in a normal job. It's a level of time spent and bond and adversity that is almost unlike anything I'd experienced, for sure. Sports teams simulate it maybe a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the diversity of the team, right? It's people from all over the world, all stripes, all backgrounds. And they just have this common goal, right? Common goal, execute mission, boom. That time was intense and heavy and a lot of learning for me, but I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, well said, man. I agree with a lot of all of what you just said, and I think that put a pin in some of those things that we'll end up
Yep.
highlighting for
Circle back.
translatable skills. Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Cool. So you finished that training, set a time, call it close to a year. That's in Germany. Do you deploy from Germany to Afghanistan, or you go back to Italy?
That was Italy. So we
So that
would
was
go
Italy.
up to
Okay.
Germany for training rotations. They have a few places there where we would just go and train. So you'd move around training. So you think you're going to be
Hmm.
in Italy, which sounds kind of nice, but you're not in Italy very much. So your stuff is there, but we would go up and you train there, and then you deploy. Yeah, we deployed from Italy. We actually went to Kuwait first. I think there was some issue with the airspace. We couldn't get through. We rerouted there. I remember landing in Kuwait too because I remember chewing gum and coming off the plane. And suddenly my gum was full of sand, and it was like chewing this gritty gum. And I was like, there was like you walked into an oven too, but it was some kind of sandstorm
Yeah.
in Kuwait, and we just landed there. So we were briefly there, and then we landed in Afghanistan proper, and
Hmm.
yeah.
So walk us through that deployment. What was like your general mission set there? How was that like?
It was tough. My friend Shane Cantu, who I again went to basic infantry and jump school with, was killed the first in August 28th. So the first we were there in July. The next month he was killed. He was at a different outpost. It was tough. Our job was to try and David Petraeus would talk about an ink blot, right? And kind of expanding the ink blot where you're trying to basically protect an area and expand that bubble. So you do movement to contact where you go where you're not necessarily going to get into a firefight just to try and expand that block. A lot of it is, I think the Taliban at that point they weren't really even seen by the locals as ideological. They were almost just seen as bandits who just robbed the farmers who were just trying to bring some crops to the market. So a lot of it was building relationships with locals. Running that intel team at the first part too was really important to get good
Mm.
intel on what was happening. Try and keep everybody safe and alive. Try and find where there's danger spots, hot spots, IEDs. Build trust, right? That farmer, if they trust you and you're, uh, kind of the cultural competence is when I think of learning the language, but also learning the cultural competence where you're going to ask about the family. I remember they would say like "Family Shema Chitor As." You'd sort of ask about this. What was your family before you bring up work and business and the family? They would always love that we would just
Mm.
know to do that, and then you know try and use that kind of a tone, and they're going to say, oh, maybe by the way, there was people digging over there last night at 3 a.m, right around there. Maybe there's an ID over there, right? You pick up that at the back part of the conversation versus the front. So I think some of that, our team, some of those skills were hopefully helpful. But there was firefights, maybe a dozen or so firefights over that time, maybe 6 where we fired back, real more full firefights that I was involved in. As the company, so the COIS team, I would go out with different units on our forward operating base, or the COP is where we were. It's called a combat outpost. So that we were at, there was an MP unit. I remember being there, which was interesting. It's kind of part of the reason I went because there was MP units are being sent out on infantry type rotations, which aren't necessarily their skill set, right? But it's why I used to saw National Guard units and reserve units being deployed into these units because it was this long into the war and you're needing people and they're trying to surge. And so I would volunteer to go out with that MP unit and got into a very dangerous situation in one of those patrols with the MPs that I remember being the person kind of in the middle. They pulled 360 security kind of all around us. And I'm the one in the center who's going to talk to the person. And they opened up a full machine gun right on myself and this guy I was talking to. And that's not my unit I'm with. Like it's not the unit I trained with. And I sort of volunteered to go with them just to sort of help them out. I think they had been hit a few times and had some casualties. And I remember that there's one or two other people from our platoon who'd gone with me, but I remember thinking, wow, this is, you are out here with a different unit, right? and not necessarily the guys who you know everything about, but it's still the same team and still trying to do the right thing. So that was, you know, it was heavy, very tough to lose Shane. Shane is we do a memorial run for him every year. I just saw him, you know, last month. This is a couple of weeks ago now. I saw his mom, and so yeah, very tough. I think anybody who's been in an infantry unit has lost people, right? And those people who didn't come home, and it's a hell of a thing because there's nothing he did wrong. There's no reason that I should be sitting here and he should be not. It's like a bolt of lightning is how random it was that he got hit by it was a cordless rifle that somebody just fired over the fence of the outpost we were in. So very tough young guy. You know, the last thing I ever said to him was like, hey, well, you know, because he was going to a different outpost than I was at. And I remember saying, you know, watch a Michigan game together, go to that stadium, you know, he's a big Michigan Wolverine fan. And that's tough for me. Every time you walk in there thinking about, you know, not being able to do that with him and all those things that are, you know, getting married, having kids, being a dad, he never got to do. So yeah, heavy duty, man. Heavy duty.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Sorry to hear. Sorry for your loss. You know, when you said walk into Michigan Stadium and thinking about him every time, I mean, that's nice, right? Like it's a means of remembering him consistently, and in some way in memory, sharing an experience with him, or reminiscing. So yeah, thank you for sharing, and sorry for your loss.
And we do a run, every year, like I said, on the day he was killed, which is about a 5K, Shane Cantu 5K. So yeah, any of your listeners who want to come support that, it's you know, run walk kind of thing. But we've had Team RWB, Team Red, White, and Blue, I mentioned before. They came up last year carrying the flag and fought maybe a dozen people. So that's a nice way to sort of keep the memory going in a positive, healthy, you know, fitness focused way, which totally. I think you would love.
Yeah, that sounds great. Is there a specific, I don't know, link or post about that I can add to the show notes?
I can send you something. It's just Shane Cantu 5K.
Cool.
For Shane, so you can pull that up. They'll have lots of different links, ways to sign up. It's every year around the Sunday around August 28th, which is the day he was killed.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll add that to the show notes for sure. Hope we get some listeners going your way for that next year.
Let's do it. Mm-hmm. Let's do it.
So in that deployment, in addition to what you've already shared, of course, is there anything else that kind of comes top of mind that you want to share that was an impactful experience?
I mean, there's a lot. It would take. We'd maybe need a whole show just devoted to a deployment. Deployments are their own world. You know, I think it's just you learn a lot about a unit when you're there, and I think some of my closest friendships. There's a great friend who I text all the time, who's still in right now, Don Castello, who I became really good buddies with over there. A big, funny, good guy, smart guy, strong, tough guy. He's now first sergeant. And so there's really positive memories too of just sort of time spent, guys like that really, can find humor. I think that's the biggest thing I lift up that maybe isn't highlighted enough in the kind of popular culture and other ways people try and talk about deployments is like the weapon, the power, the humor. Humor is over there. Keeping a sense of humor, and then craziest scenarios and situations. And he's a guy who really, taught me that too. He's got a great sort of sense of humor and uses it as a tool to lead and motivate and fire people up. And so, yeah, I think that's that backside, especially we're doing 12 on, 12 off shifts in the winter when it's ice cold, no heat in those towers. And it's a little bit, it's slow grinding. And I want to lift up families too, because I think those deployments can feel sort of fast and awful to us, and it can be slow and awful for the families. So that's my wife started something at that time called the Military Spouses of Michigan, which was a network to sort of help the spouses and families that are going through a slow grind of not knowing and just sort of being left. A lot of them are not working. They're actually, those who are on the base are pulled out of the job market. This is an interesting thing to lift up, which is, the number of people on the base who are needing to do government assistance, right? These are soldiers. I remember our first sergeant had done 70 months of deployment, 70. It's a better part of 5 years, right? Deployed. These are people we should be taking care of, lifted up. And I think it's because Italy joined our side of the war. I could have this wrong, but I think it's true. Because they joined our side of the war before the end of World War II, the Status of Forces Agreement, our agreement with Italy, is more nice to the Italians than it is to Germany, where there's, you can take a job off post in Germany. In Italy, you cannot do that. You really could only take a job on post. So a lot of families and spouses, there's a couple jobs, a little library, it's a very small post there. If they can't get one of those jobs, they're effectively pulled out of the job market. Maybe it's changed now with the Zoom world and it's easier. At that time, it was very challenging, really a disruption to the career. So that's another thing that I think we just need to lift up and think about is how you support those families, especially those spouses who are, you're giving up sometimes careers, precious years, and it can be very, very tough. The budget of the military, you're not paying those soldiers a lot. They're not being paid, especially infantry, enlisted side, you're not. So that's just something that I also doesn't get enough I think light on it is the role, the service of the families and some of the sacrifices that they're making, financially and also being long term. When you're pulled out of a career path for 4 years, that's not an easy thing to recover from sometimes.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you. Well said. Definitely doesn't get enough traction, light on it, etc. So yeah. Thank you for bringing that up.
Sure.
So Afghanistan deployment ends. You come back to, I'm guessing, Italy.
Yeah, back on post. One of the things we did to re-enter that I think is important to mention was start a chapter of Team Red, White, and Blue. So we actually started a Vicenza, Italy chapter of Team RWB to help, I think, pivot back the right way. I think a lot of guys will come back from those deployments and you got some money saved up and make a lot of bad choices, right? They're drinking and just like people get out of the service, right? You got this right track, wrong track moments. And I've been a firm believer that, drinking 99-cent beers together and telling war stories, that's one way to go. And there's a role for it and there's nothing wrong with it, but to also hit the gym together, right? To also, we did like a Tough Mudder, my wife did it with us too. We did a Tough Mudder with my unit, a bunch of guys from the unit up in, I forget where, Austria or something. I don't remember where it was, but diving through fences and mud and you're just having a blast, but it's also keeping you in shape. And that's like healthy body, healthy mind, healthy spirit. Like that, doing climbs in the Alps with these guys in Team Red, White, and Blue. That's one of my best memories of post-deployment. Besides getting a dog, got a Labrador for the first time, a black lab over there that somebody in our neighborhood had a litter of 8 of them, which I still got. But it was trying to add something that I'd picked up before the service through Mike Irwin and Team Red, White, and Blue and saying, let's start up a chapter and just have they do races and get guys who, a lot of them had never done stuff like that. They've done military workout, but military workout can feel like your job. What about working out for fun? What about some of these, get a medal around your neck and people cheering when you run a 5K? It's kind of a fun thing. Even some of the marathons again, and got into one of those like all night runs. That's the other ultramarathon I ended up doing. I think it's an ultra technically is anything past 26.2.
Right.
And so we did, a group of us just did, a competition where you just kind of run. I don't want to say it's 24 hours, something like that. And you hand off, like you run, hand off, but your team is running constantly for 24 hours. So I definitely did more than 26, I think, on that. But those kind of things were the best way to, I think, stay healthy coming home and get ready for what's next. And ended up being, our unit was one of those, you're rotated around, but when you're kind of on, you can go anywhere in the world. I want to say 18 hours. You're ready to go in the drop of a hat. And so it was, I want to say Easter weekend. We were trying to take a trip down and see the Pope or something cool. And we were like literally in the driveway to pull out and do that. My wife had come over there. She was back and forth, right, with her work. And we got one of those alerts. You gotta go. It's time. They don't tell you anything. You just gotta go. We're not, show up, report back. And in very short order, we were, and you can look in the news and kind of guess that this was the Russians that invaded the Crimea Peninsula. And that's probably what we're dealing with here. And sure enough, our this is Charlie Company, first of the 503rd, Battalion, 173rd Airborne. We were the first boots on the ground up there, at least publicly. I mean, there might have been others, not public, but publicly. So they kind of made it, very public. We were going there. They wanted to show that we were going up there to train the NATO troops, in a kind of response to this aggression. So just like that, this is 2014 at that point, and snapped your fingers, and we're back in. It was more of technically a training deployment. That's not technically in a combat zone, but it was you're sort of setting up, trainings like I was describing before, and you're working with NATO troops, which we've done a little bit in Afghanistan, but we're on our own much more there. And this was really with some really remarkable, the Canadian. I remember those guys. I think it's called the Princess Patricia or something, named after her. So the name, the only parachute unit in the Canadian Army, I want to say, and those guys were awesome. They jump out of anything. They would jump into the North Atlantic. I mean, these guys we jumped out of Blackhawks and Chinooks and did helicopter parachuting. That's where we did some water training with them. And I really enjoyed the Polish troops we worked with. They were great, others, but that sort of a special parachute unit from Canada they were a blast. That was really good. And there was a lot of intel work to do up there too. I was a squad leader at that point, so I'd gotten my corporal stripes and became a team leader in Afghanistan. I think I was a full sergeant at this point in the Baltic states is where we were. So it was really not just Poland. It was like Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. It was all of those states. The 173rd was in, but our unit was in Poland. And so, that was really the last time, right up almost until I got out. We were there a couple months that summer. I got out in the fall, and was back home. Yeah.
So it was effectively like a show of force and just joint training. Cool.
Yeah, big, high visibility parachute jumps. I mentioned the seizing of airports. We train on actual airport seizures and some specialized stuff like the water, hitting the water, all kinds of stuff that we'd do it very high profile. So I can talk pretty openly about that because it was all, we wanted people to see what we were doing and that this unit was up there. And I think they're probably still up there to this day. I mean, they've kept that, support for our NATO, allies, high vis support as a primary mission. And I want to say it's almost night and day from Afghanistan because the first day in Afghanistan, the actual first day, I remember having a meal, one of our first meals there, sitting in a chow hall, and they shot a rocket into the chow hall that hit and injured a cook. That was the day one in Afghanistan. Day one in Poland was like they like stopped the soccer game, these kids, and came over and like cheered the bus, or we were pulling out of there. I mean, they were very happy we were there. They were very happy to like, who knows where this is going to stop, right? They're going to keep rolling through. Like Grandpa said, this will roll through. Like that. This was one of those, thank God you guys are here because this is, linking arms with us. It was a really warm welcome. So that was kind of a very nice juxtaposition.
Sure. Yeah. Could imagine. Yeah. So toward the end of that deployment, was you finishing your enlistment like set in stone, or was that kind of like a decision process?
No, you don't have a choice. There's no asking. You can re-enlist and you could go for another 4 years or whatever it is. But I mean, I was older and I had a career in Detroit I wanted to get back to. So in a life and family, I wanted to be a dad, start a family because, we were kind of, my wife's like, I'm not doing this alone. So we're going to wait till you're back. And, that was primary. So yeah, that was always the plan. I was in all the way to 2019 because when you sign an enlisted contract, you are in for 8 years, 4 years active. So it's really 3 years plus training usually, and then 4 years reserve. So it was still any minute they could have called you back up. And they actually were. A lot of guys were stop lost during those Iraq, Afghanistan years.
Right.
So that was a real possibility, but it ended up being, time to be home that fall. I want to say September that year I came home back to Detroit. And it's like being in one of those cars, those long, skinny drag racing cars where they like pop the parachutes to slow it down. I felt like jumping out of one of those things. And like I'd been in one of those type of cars for like 3 years and like stepping out of it and it just pulls off and you're just like standing there on the side of the road. Like what just happened? And, that's a hell of, we can talk about transition if you want to move into it, because that's a very unique kind of headspace to be in. Even as an older guy with pedigree, that was quite a moment.
Yeah. So like what I meant was, like in terms of, finishing your enlistment or at least active,
Yeah.
If like your decision was, yeah, I'm finishing, like this is what I signed up for, I'm good, or if you were considering, re-up in, like what was your headspace in that moment is kind of what I'm getting at.
I see. No, I'd always, because I was enlisted, it was, and I was going to be reserve, an active reserve, but
Mm-hmm.
I had that. I wanted to get back to Detroit. That's still my life's work. This was mostly in response to 9/11 and the
Mm-hmm.
burden of the Afghanistan war going on so long and falling on such a small group, um, that that it felt right to get back to Detroit, to dig back into, the city was just coming out of the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. Right, so Detroit had actually declared bankruptcy as a city, and so it was a really kind of historic time to go home and try and
Mm-hmm.
kind of lean into that moment, which is what I ended up doing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, yeah, let's go to the transition period. So you finish your active duty, get back home to Detroit. What is that? What is that like?
Yeah, so coming home in the fall, as I said, it was 2013. I think the city had officially declared the bankruptcy. So you're entering a really an interesting moment where a lot of people I really admired from around the country, a guy named Maurice Cox, who'd been, worked in New Orleans, and really he was this most recently. I was texting with him yesterday. He was a city planner in Chicago, um, and Arthur Jamison. He was coming into Detroit. He came in shortly after Arthur Jamison, who was just the planning director of the city of Boston. He was our housing director in Detroit. A guy named Jed Halbert, who was the deputy, worked for Dan Doctoroff, who was the deputy economic development director under Mayor Bloomberg and for all New York City. Jed had come in as one of the real economic development leaders in New York, now to Detroit. So you all had a cabinet of people coming together in the city, who I was really interested to work with, and I was spent that fall really talking to people. There's foundations, there's the sort of civic, technology space I'd worked in before. There's the corporations. Dan Gilbert was Quicken Loans had moved back there. So there's a lot of people doing a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
but to me it was that sort of team of experts. One of the best CIOs in the country, a woman named Beth Niblock, was in Lexington, Kentucky, and had just moved up there to join the cabinet too. So it was just, I wanted to, in the end, after doing a lot of kind of talking and meeting with people, to sort of answer the question of pound for pound, how can I be most valuable, helping what I care the most about, which in that moment was revitalizing the city of Detroit. It seemed like joining this team at the city was what was needed to get through bankruptcy. The city actually had a very unique thing happen where the foundations, the philanthropic foundations, had put the better part of $1 billion together with the state of Michigan, to protect the pensioners. The pensioners did take a huge cut. The pensioners are real heroes in that. And, but the foundations didn't have to do this either. They stepped in and put money in to mitigate that, as well as to protect some of the artwork at the Detroit Institute of Arts, which was, again, could have been technically on the chopping block going through a bankruptcy. So the foundations had all put these funds together. And in that process, one of their conditions was they created a role called the Chief Development Officer. And the Chief Development Officer would sort of help shepherd those funds, which sat at the community foundation, and sort of make sure that the payments schedule was maintained, and would help map out the federal grants. A lot of the federal grants were a bit of a mess, or be sending money back, right, that a city desperately needed because the reports weren't filed on time or whatever. So cleaning up a lot of that grant work, and then getting all those foundations who kind of bet on the future of Detroit to give second, third order investments, right? So if you think about the Ford Foundation, right, one of the biggest, I think maybe after Gates, one of the second biggest foundation in the country, if not the world, they gave the biggest grant in their history to the city of Detroit, a $125 million grant to a municipality. I mean, can you imagine like that? It's really remarkable what happened
Yeah.
there. And so that was when I looked at all the ways I could work and be valuable. In the years before I went into the service, what I'd done in 16 states is I built this sort of civic technology nonprofit network, and had gotten to know a lot of the big foundations. So they really trusted me, knew me. And that's a lot of what that work is people who can, I was a very data-driven person, kind of believed in metrics and randomized treatment evaluations of what was working and what they would be doing to try and do social change work. So in short, it was a good fit for me. It was a real need and this great cast of people at the city of Detroit. So I stepped in there in 2015, like January. So I spent the fall looking around and meeting and readjusting, recalibrating,
Mm-hmm.
and lean into the revitalization of the city of Detroit for the next 5 years.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing. Incredible timing and all of that. What was
Yeah.
the time frame between coming home, finishing enlistment, and starting that role?
It was the fall of 2014. I don't remember the exact date I came home. Probably September, because that's September 11th is when I had gone over there. I remember.
Mm-hmm.
So you roughly have that's your 3 year clock. So it's 3 years, at the unit, the training on top of that. So I'm going to guess September, October-ish, I came home and
Sure.
really used those. I sort of gave myself to the end of the year to try and find the right, good job, right? To get back in the job market and transition. For all that they say they help you in the military transition, they really don't. They really had us working up in the Ukraine stuff in
Mm-hmm.
Poland at right up as long as you can go, and then when you get back, the op tempo stays high. And I remember talking to one of the leaders and saying, why don't we support transition? We measure everything, right? You measure like your heart rates in the morning. Right? He said, well, it's not my job. My job is to get these troops ready to go fight and win war. And like, until somebody up top says, your metric's going to be how many of these soldiers have a full-time job lined up? How many of these soldiers have a full-time college program lined up that they're
Mm-hmm.
enrolled into? Until that's a metric that they're measuring, I'm not going to do it. Maybe a couple will, some good people, and it's something value, but what gets managed and done is what gets measured, and
Right.
so that's something that I really took the fall to do, and I can't imagine how hard that would be if I was younger. It was tough just on me because which in my headspace is really worrying about all these guys. Like you lose your security clearance, right? The minute you're out, it's like over, and
Yeah.
so all these guys who you're just and I was a team leader, squad leader actually up in Poland. He was worried if they're okay. What are they doing? I think they're going to get sent back somewhere else. And it was just like, you just keeps you up, right? You're wondering
Yeah.
about, are they all right? All these soldiers, this guy was sick. This guy's mom had a problem. This guy had a divorce going. This guy, oh my, and it just, you're gone. It's like the only
Mm-hmm.
thing you ever do alone in the military is leave, right? And it's very, very jarring, even for somebody like me who was older. And being younger, I almost can't imagine how hard that must be. Um, but luckily, managed through it and ended up in a good spot with a good team after a few months, probably 3 months as we guessed, October, November, December to really work it, and then started in January.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not a crazy amount of time at all. I mean, I would suggest that's even
No.
on the shorter end, right? Maybe you're getting to like a medium kind of a scale, but yeah, that's a pretty
Yeah.
quick turnaround. In
Yeah.
hindsight, what kind of like advice would you give your younger self? Again, in hindsight, kind of knowledge for other veterans in this kind of space or that are about to enter this space.
Look before you need to look.
Mm.
Um, that downtime, that the soldiers are spending staying fit, it's just good and great, but move the needle on your academics, man. Get that degree. If they need the GED, get that GED. Get a college degree. There's people who can just get that, 2 year degree. You can do the
Mm-hmm.
coursework. A lot of that's there, and you actually in that downtime can knock that out, and it really will set them up for some success. And look at the companies that are looking for veterans, right? Look
Mm-hmm.
for the Home Depot types, people who really celebrate veterans and not just, I think of it as like, the support for veterans these days is kind of a mile wide, but like an inch deep, right?
Yeah.
Where they'll cheer for you at the halftime of the football game. And that's a great thing. And don't get me wrong. That's, a lot of the Vietnam veterans feel they did not get that. And that is a very important thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what they need is a job. What they
Yeah.
need when they get out and that uniform comes up is a new uniform coming on or a new purpose coming on. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the number one thing to right track or wrong track, guys, for those first 6 months, like you said. Are they getting back on that wrong track, on that right track? How are they readjusting? So when you're improve your station and look to companies and look to line something up firm. Get that acceptance letter, get that job offer accepted before you're out. Once you're
Yeah.
out, it's tough. Just like any job. Never leave a current job till you have your next, right? If you
Yeah.
have that choice, if you're so lucky. So the guys who are in, I know they're still in, lock that down, make that time, schedule that time. And I know it's hard. I know it's an almost impossible thing to say. I didn't do it. I couldn't do it. But try. If you
Yeah.
can do it, I think it'll make it so much easier to make that switch over and look for the difference. The people who will just love you to death, but not hire, right? Love to clap, but like when it gets to hiring, there are the real studies will show you it's non-vet, vet, identical credentials. That non-vet's getting the job. And a lot of that can be basic hiring discrimination, subconsciously or consciously. I just, like racism, sexism, that you can hire somebody just like you across the table, whether you know it or not, or like it or not. And a veteran can feel like an other. I think it's illegal actually in a job interview to ask veteran status because it's been used to discriminate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is mind boggling for veterans because you always want to hire a veteran almost every time because I know the value and the assets class they bring, but a lot of people don't. It's just an other. A very small subset have served, and a lot of times they'll read PTSD rates or whatever. There's some kind of stigma that they'll put
Mm-hmm.
on it, and that's maybe enough again, consciously or subconsciously, to just not get that higher. So look for the companies that know it, know the difference. Look for the leaders that know the difference, and build networks with civilians. That's why I love Team Red, White, and Blue. A lot of military guys like. This guy marries that guy's sister. It's a very small, insular little network, and you got to meet other people. And
Mm-hmm.
Team Red, White, and Blue welcomes in civilians. That's why I ran it. Like I was telling you before I was in, I was doing stuff with veterans, and I was welcomed in. It wasn't like a little club I wasn't a part of. It was like, no, you're awesome for showing up, for being here and wanting to do this with us. Let's go.
Yeah.
Do that. Meet those civilians. Those guys are gateways to jobs all day long, right?
Yeah.
So those are a couple thoughts I wish I had maybe locked in a little bit more. But I just, I don't think with the trip to Poland, I don't think there was really the bandwidth and the time to do it. But if those guys can, do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great advice, and also great kind of actionables that veterans could take advantage of. Like I will double down on that program that you mentioned, Team Red, White, and Blue. I think, like you mentioned, just in terms of I'll call it psychological, both in terms of health and just psyche, of being in a community, having something to do with the community, those things being physical, right? I think that's an
Yeah.
awesome dynamic for people for veterans to get involved in, and let that help them segue into civilian life. That's awesome,
Yep.
man.
Great.
So I had us take a step back from where you had ended, which is your chief development officer role for Detroit. After that, I believe you started in the role that you're at today. Is that correct?
Right. The built
Cool.
environment. Yeah, we can dig
Yeah.
right into that. I know it's
Yes.
your lane. Yeah,
So
the
walk us through that.
most exciting project that I saw on the horizon while at the city of Detroit, in my view, is the one I'm working on now, which is, again, growing up in Ann Arbor. Like you can, just from this interview, you can see why I love it so much. It's the University of Michigan building a new kind of tech innovation campus in Detroit. Right. So it's bringing like a lot of my loves together, right? The city of Ann Arbor and University of Michigan, Detroit itself, which I've sort of seen not compete together in the global economy, right? Ann Arbor and Detroit almost competing separately. The research muscle of Ann Arbor, economic development muscle of Detroit, not being together like they do in Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, the Research Triangle, other places where they're together as a region. They're going for stuff. I've seen them be way too far apart. Ann Arbor, maybe 45 miles from Detroit, can feel like 1,000 miles away for too many years, most of my adult life. And what was happening was the Amazon HQ2 bid, right? Where Amazon was looking for a second headquarters. Every city was kind of making a pitch. Detroit made a pitch. It wasn't in the ballpark, wasn't in the conversation. And a lot of leadership at the University of Michigan, one of the best public research universities in the world, and leadership in the city were like, okay, why? Why did we miss this? And I think one of the things they saw was that Amazon, first, if you remember, they wanted to locate in both New York City and Washington, D.C. That's what they said. We're going to do a double in both. New York City, if you look at where they wanted to be, they wanted to be by a tech campus, this new tech campus called Cornell Tech, which is Technion, right? The sort of Israeli MIT, and Cornell University put together a beautiful bid that actually beats Stanford which everybody thought would get it. There's an applied sciences campus in New York that Michael Bloomberg had, opened up as trying to diversify the New York City economy away from, media and finance and insurance stuff to a little more tech future. And anyway, Cornell Tech won it. And Dan Huttenlocker, who was a wonderful dean of Cornell Tech, he was also on the board of Amazon. He took that board through Cornell Tech and water taxi over to Queens. You can literally throw a stone from Cornell Tech from Roosevelt Island to Manhattan right to Queens where Amazon was going to be. I think politics sort of pushed them out of the New York, but they ended up going to a tech campus in Virginia. They're in Crystal City. The state did a Virginia Tech Innovation Campus where they wanted to be by. So in short, building something like that was what I left to do full time, the city of Detroit in 2020. The founder of our company, Stephen Ross, big donor to the University of Michigan, the namesake of the business school there. He's on the board of Cornell Tech. He was part of helping build that campus. And I think we both were aligned in our excitement for this. And he said, let's see if we can get this done, because the University of Michigan for years, I think, has built, there's more venture capital per square foot in Ann Arbor than in Silicon Valley, right? How much of that's really in Detroit? And so this was something that I thought was remarkably, uniquely transformational for the knowledge economy the state needs to build in Michigan. And so, we dove in together, and I've been doing it for coming up on actually over 4 years now. 2024, so over 4 years.
That's an awesome project, man. Really nice.
Thank you.
So in the process of getting involved right in the built environment now, what are translatable skills that you've seen military to profession?
Team building, team leadership, project management. I mean, so much of military life, if you look at the old, even historically, like Napoleon, these logistics guys always joke about that in the military, how they win or lose the battle. Can't eat, can't fight, right? So the level of supply chain, organizational, the basic, planning that goes into military mission operational planning is exceptionally good. And the training that people have and don't even know they have, right? The project management, they don't even know they have, right? Culture, they'll always say, right? Culture eats everything for breakfast, right? Culture is so powerful. The culture, these sort of isms that Dan Gilbert uses, this sort of, culture of sayings and kind of mantras, right? The military has culture, and people are almost so enmeshed and they almost can't see it. It's like a fish in water, right? You need to step back and you'll see the sort of culture, some of it not good, some of it good, but it's powerful, right? Building a culture on a team, remarkable, right? The construction, right? Building things for real, putting up buildings. We're doing 2 hotels, right? Residential. Related Company is one of the largest owner preservers of affordable housing in the United States. That's really what the company is and does. Building that, authentically mixed use, right? So there's affordable housing, there's, market rate housing, building that community. Like the military is able to work with diverse teams, right? The 82nd Airborne I mentioned earlier, they're called the All-American Unit because they used to have somebody literally from all 50 states who was like part of those teams, right? Racial backgrounds, gender, right? Wealthy, poor, big, small. You've worked with every single type of person in high stress environments. So deep teamwork, that kind of cultural components, and then real supply chain and plan management, timeline, deadlines, work ethic. I could go on, but it is a tremendous set of skills that an infantry leader wouldn't necessarily think they have, right? First glance, be like, oh, a police officer, translatable skills, right? Tactical door kicking, enter and clear a room. There's about 100 other things that if you step back, that are softer skills will wash right into built environment. That's why I love the conversation, the space you've created here, because that really, I've seen a lot of veterans thrive in that. The related companies, we're all over the place. A lot of veterans work with and for us. And so, when you think of placemaking, kind of what's happening in Afghanistan, people think of combat and firefights. Most of the time outside of that, you're doing kind of placemaking, where you're setting up a COP, you're setting up a FOB, you're doing water, you're doing planning, right? Landscaping, you're looking at weather, you're doing so much of the built environment that is really the day-to-day drivers, that the tip of that may be a firefight, or maybe a movement to contact, but most of it has a lot to do with place development and planning and logistics, that you come out with a vast array of skills that you may not know you have as a soldier until you step back.
Yep. Yeah, well said, man. That is exactly why this platform is what it is to highlight the fact that principles translate in an amazing capacity, almost entirely, right? Exactly as you put it. Move away from like the tip of the spear, right? Those direct actions and those smaller moments in the bigger picture, right? And you have that same principle structure of whether it be management or it be planning or it be logistics, and all of that translates beautifully.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, awesome, man. So closing out the professional side of the conversation, we'll touch on our final two questions. We'll start with wellness practice. What does that look like for you?
As I mentioned earlier, meditation is a part of martial arts practice, and I've done martial arts for, since 1999, I think, is my first time I stepped in the dojo. So I kind of understood in the right dojo, they'll tell you it's as much internal as it is external, right? Meditation is the foundation for almost all true martial arts. You go all the way back to the foundations of it. And so, yoga stretching is always part of martial arts before you get into, so the softer side, the internal side, the Tai Chi side, I'm as big a believer in as the harder stuff, right? The grappling, the jujitsu, the china, the striking, that is part of it, but it's half the pie. If you don't have the other stuff, I don't think you're really, in my view, a complete martial artist. And so I've kept that throughout. And believe in it tremendously. It's nice to see meditation's gone a lot more mainstream, especially in the COVID era, or these sort of apps that sort of help with it. But I couldn't be a bigger believer in kind of mindfulness is another way to think about it. Isn't sort of sitting in a chair and not moving. That's one type of it. But mindfulness is really just being present, being focused, right? In whatever you're doing, whether it's rock climbing. That's why I love rock climbing, right? You are very present. You're going to fall off that wall. Yeah. So mindfulness is a real practice. Sitting meditation is a good part of it. But my son went back to the dojo, got me back to the dojo. So nice. I do practice on my own, but there's a dojo in Michigan that I love that I'd gone to for how many years and years before I went to the services. And he was at 6, I think he's allowed to go. So he got me to start up some of that formal work again. He's a young guy, so I'm not, he's stick with it as he wants, but it was fun to get back in there with him. So, mindfulness, meditation, I'm a big believer in. Overall fitness, I'm getting more into the run, bike, swim now a little bit more. Just ease up on my knees, right? As you get older and the knees don't need as many miles. I don't need as many ultramarathon miles on them. I can get in the pool more and make time for that. But fitness, that's the biggest, healthiest part of the military besides the brotherhood and sisterhood is just the fitness. Like starting your day with a workout is an incredibly important wellness practice that I think is, again, mainstreaming more and more. Like start your day with that good sleep hygiene. Military is, they practice it, but I have a friend who was on a 24-hour guard shift and we got pulled in what's called an EDRE, which is an emergency deployment readiness exercise for another 24. The guy was up for about 52 hours before he did a night parachute jump onto an airport. So yeah, I say sleep hygiene to mean the military knows the importance of it and they know what happens when you don't have it. Sometimes you need to train to not have it. So I'm not saying they don't have terrible sleep practices, but good sleep hygiene, good fitness, and good meditation, mindfulness are all real big parts of what I try to keep up with for wellness.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I entirely agree and well said. Cool. So last question here is any book or books you'd like to recommend? And like we talked about before we started recording, audiobooks, of course, play. I'm a strictly audiobooks person, so I'm with you there.
I mentioned Sebastian Junger earlier. Tim Hetherington was actually killed in Libya, I think, by some shrapnel. Wonderful guy. Sebastian's written books about him, but he wrote The Perfect Storm for people who don't know Sebastian Junger. He did Restrepo, which is nominated for an Academy Award. I mean, he's a filmmaker too, but he's really an author. And he writes a book called Tribe, which I would recommend to everybody. And it talks about his time in the military, but also finding purpose and meaning and how young men especially will sort of seek that and how you can do it in healthier ways and there's unhealthy ways as well. So kind of anything Sebastian has touched, I'd probably recommend. I don't even know if he's got a newer one. He just listened to him on a podcast talking about surviving near death, which I just love the podcast. I'm going to pick that book up. But Tribe is sort of, I swear by Tribe. And I think anything Sebastian's doing, I'm going to pick up.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm familiar with his books. I haven't seen that film though. So I'm going to put both of those things on my list. One of his books and two, that film. I'm excited to read and watch that. Awesome recommendations, Ben.
Great.
All right, Ryan, really appreciate you coming on the show, spending the time to share your story. An amazing story, an amazing trajectory. I'm excited to see the end result of this project that you're on right now, building in Michigan. Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for making this space. I'll come back anytime.
Absolutely. All right, man. We'll talk real soon. Thank you to our channel sponsors, Jet.Build. If you're looking for ways to better manage your real estate development and construction projects, look no further. Jet is the command center software for end-to-end real estate development and construction management. That's www.jet.build.